A unique blend of Cubism and Futurism, Vorticism was an important British art movement of the early 20th century. The movement's central figure was the English painter and writer Percy Wyndham Lewis, the name referring to the emotional vortex which was considered to be the necessary source of artistic creation, was coined by the American poet Ezra Pound. These two, together with members of the Rebel Art Center, founded Vorticism in 1914. Embracing contradiction and humor, the Vorticists celebrated the energy and dynamism of the modern age and declared for a new transformation within the British traditions in order to introduce a new era where art could potentially relate to all. The Vorticists soon developed an abstract style with bold colors, harsh lines, and sharp angles to depict the movement of industrial life. Vorticism encompassed many media, including painting, sculpture, literature, typography, and design in an effort to transform how people interacted with the world. For a few months in 1913, Wyndham Lewis worked at Omega Workshops, a collective design firm backed by Bloomsbury painter and critic Roger Fry. Fry attempted to erase the line between fine and decorative arts by hiring innovative artists to design furniture, textiles, and other objects for the modern home. While Lewis welcomed the opportunity to sell objects directly to the public without a middleman, he felt Fry had misled him about a particular commission for an interior design, and in a very public move, Lewis dramatically left the company along with artists Edward Wadsworth, Cuthbert Hamilton, and Frederick Etchells. After leaving, the four artists signed an open letter accusing Fry of deception and dishonesty. Soon afterwards, Lewis set up a workshop of his own as a appointed alternative to Fry's company. He called it the Rebel Art Center, intended to host exhibitions, lectures, and classes. The Rebel Art Center soon attracted a group of artists who would be the creative minds behind Vorticism. Arguably, Vorticism's most significant contribution to art history came in the form of its magazine Blast. Only 2 issues were ever published, but they are vital for understanding the Vorticist aims and positioning. It contains some of the most significant works of Vorticist art and poetry. Wyndham Lewis edited the magazine and intended it to be a radical assault, visually and conceptually, on the British cultural establishment. The front cover proclaims this bold aim with the word blast written across a bright pink page. The first issue, released only weeks before the outbreak of World War I, contained the Vorticist Manifesto, largely composed by Lewis with the help of Pound, written in various size fonts, underlined and bolded across some 20 pages. Largely a list that both condemns or blasts, but also praises or blesses things, ideas, and people. The manifesto combines seriousness, humor, and satire to skewer traditional British art and politics. Vorticism embraces innovation, radical art, individualism, machinery, and urbanization in an effort to unleash the vitality of the modern world. Published in 1915 amidst the First World War, a year after the inaugural issue, the second issue of Blast signaled the effects of the war on the Vorticist attitudes towards the machine age. Rather than the bold typography of the first issue, the second issue's cover design is monochromatic, featuring a woodcut by Wyndham Lewis. Subtitled The War Number, the pages inside also lack the drama of the first one. Less popular than the first, this issue offered more poetry by Ezra Pound, Helen Saunders, and Jessie Dismore, and included many references to war. Famously, it also features Preludes and Rhapsody on a Windy Night, 2 well-known poems by T.S. Eliot, who became associated with the movement throughout his friendship with Ezra Pound. Vorticism was notable for embracing a number of different art forms, The group laid emphasis on literary content as well as the visual aspects of the movement, thus increasing its far-reaching influence. The overheated rhetoric used by the artists in the writings ensured it a place next to groups such as Futurist and Dadaist. Wyndham Lewis himself was first and foremost a writer, and Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot were closely associated with the group. Additionally, other members of the movement were primarily visual artists, such as Henry Godard, Brazeska, and Jessica Dismore, were encouraged to publish their literary writings in blast alongside their artistic work. Although Ezra Pound produced a number of poems which he labeled Vorticist, very little purely Vorticist poetry was produced. Most of what was published in blast can also be assigned to other literary movements. Jacob Epstein and Henry Godard Brazeska are the most notable sculptors associated with the Vorticist movement. Epstein did not sign the Vorticist manifesto in the first issue of Blast, but his works dating from this period are closely related. Epstein's Rock Drill describes the rise and fall of Vorticism. Initially, Epstein created a vision of a human-machine hybrid that was to be 9 feet tall, but after seeing the effects of World War I, he damaged and shortened the work, leaving a hurt torso damaged by the machine it was once joined to. Henry Godard Brazeska translated the Vorticist interest in movement into three-dimensional form. Instead, in creating a pure form, he used direct carving to find a distilled essence of his subject. Vorticism saw its most important idea, the vortex, most fully developed in 2 dimensions, on paper and canvas. The Vorticists, like the Futurists, were deeply interested in movement and the whirling and turning of modern life, but they differed from their Italian counterparts in their interest in the static center of the vortex, in the stillness in the midst of motion. The central static element about which the rest of the painting turns is evident in Helen Saunders' Dance and Wyndham Lewis's The Workshop. The Vorticist's decision to publicize their art and ideas in the form of a magazine is highly significant. The format allowed them to combine visual art, design, and literature, uniting the creative endeavors of a movement that was fairly fragile in terms of its members and media. The magazine cost was very cheap, which meant it could be purchased by people who could not afford to collect art or even expensive poetry books, but very few people bought it at the time. Despite this initial failure to reach a large audience, Blast, more than any painting, endures as one of the group's most important legacies, having influenced British sculptor Henry Moore and later musician David Bowie. In some senses, the Vorticist movement was over before it had barely started. The first issue of Blast was published only weeks before the outbreak of the First World War, which changed the socio-cultural environment in Britain and caused the death of at least one important member, Henry Godard Brazeska. The experiences of the war caused many people to reject the celebration of the machine, which had originally driven the Vorticists, and their followers fell out of favor. Consequently, the Vorticists' few exhibitions did not stir much reaction, and individual artists moved on to other styles. In 1920, the Wyndham Lewis tried to revive the movement with Group X, a London exhibition that drew together some of the Vorticist artists again, but the group never fully functioned. These artists were now all taking their art in new directions, and the movement's rhythm had been lost. After this, Vorticism was generally little discussed by art historians, and during this time, a number of significant works by Vorticist artists were lost.